Welcome back, everybody. It is round number 2 of Neighbors and Nugent. You know what they say, Nick? You improve the most from the first week to the second week. I'm feeling that for us right now.
I like it. Let's make it happen.
You know, I'm around Nick a lot, and he's learning more about me, and I'll be the first one to call myself out. You know, this is my wallet, by the way. Nick has a problem with my wallet. He thinks it's a little too big. This is actually a condensed version of my wallet. You don't like the wallet. Too big, right? Oh, look at that. Oh. Maybe
that's why. I mean, your hips are out of whack. You're probably giving yourself some serious pelvic issues that you're going to pay for when you're 75 years old. You're probably turning left all day long. It's terrible.
That's the kind of content we give you off the bat. Well, listen, we have a lot coming up. Let's look at our menu. You really want to stick around. Great show coming up. Our 4 starters segment. We're going to give you, in our mind, what we think are overrated things in our society. You know, last week we set the tone for this podcast and told you what we believe in. So if you didn't check that out, you can look at our first episode. Our guest, we're really excited about this. Lightning play-by-play man, Dave Mishkin. It's his 20th season. We worked together way back when, Nick. In his first season, Mishkin has some great stuff coming up, especially if you want to get in the business. You hear his career path, talks about his favorite calls, and of course he's known for this.
Hagel put it in front. Killorn shoots, save made. Rebound point. Score! Score! Brayden Point! Brayden Point!
Yeah, his enthusiasm, unbelievable. Dave Mishkin will have his thoughts on everything about his career and his experiences with the Lightning. We'll have the Final 5, which has a NFL commentating theme. A lot of criticism of Tony Romo. Tom Brady just retired. We're going to look at your favorite NFL broadcasters, and we love your feedback if you agree with us on that. And finally, our final rant. But let's get to our first segment, 4 starters. You know, all of us have opinions on sports and on life. There are things that are underrated, Nick Nugent, and there are things that are overrated. Off the top of your head, I know we've talked about this in our pre-show meetings. What are things in society that are overrated for you?
No problem. First one, I'm very passionate about this one. Sushi. I think sushi is wildly overrated. And I'm of the opinion, I'll take it one step further. Not only is it overrated, but I'm of the opinion that people only eat sushi because they like to tell people that they're eating sushi. I think it's obnoxious. I think it's just as normal as any other food. Relax with the sushi. It's not that great. And if I hear sushi one more time, I'm not happy. And if you want me to not be there for a meeting, include sushi, and I won't be there. Next.
I almost included that in my list, by the way, but go ahead, yeah.
Well, next is going to catch some flack for this. Fantasy football. People got to relax with fantasy football. It's fun. I get it. Do it with your family. Do it with your friends. Have a fantasy football draft. But there are people that are moving their lives around for fantasy football. There are people that are traveling to outrageous places for a fantasy football draft. And there are people getting very angry with players when they're sitting out of a fourth quarter win or not catching a ball because their fantasy score isn't going to be as high as they want. I think people need to relax a little bit, chill out with the fantasy football. Let the football players play football. Keep your fantasy to yourself. And
hey, Nick, by the way, I almost won my fantasy league this year.
Did you?
Do you care?
Almost? Yeah. Almost is really cool, man. It's really cool. Do you get like a ring for that? Yeah, the small trophy.
Yeah.
I bet you the runner-up meant a lot to you too. I bet you probably told people about it. Just absolutely embarrassing. Almost as embarrassing as your George Costanza wallet, but not quite as embarrassing. Third for me is pickleball. I'm done talking about pickleball. All right. Wow. People are talking to me about pickleball. Let's go play pickleball. We should all get together and play pickleball. Relax. All right. It's tennis, ping pong, pickleball, squash. They're all fun. But people are telling me that pickleball is sweeping the world right now when it comes to sport. To me, it's for people that can't do other things. Yeah, it's a little bit of fun, but relax. Relax with the pickleball. I'm done with it.
I was with you on sushi. I get the fantasy football, but I haven't even delved into pickleball yet. So I'm going to wait and see on that one. Let me get to my overrated. See what you think, partner. First one, fireworks. I don't get fireworks. You've seen one fireworks show. You've seen them all. People get all enamored. Well, there's going to be fireworks after the game. I don't get it. Are you a fireworks guy, Nick?
No, absolutely not. I'm with you on this one. In fact, people that video fireworks are even more obnoxious. When have you ever, after July 4th, after a big firework game, the next day sat down on your couch and watched your video of the fireworks? Completely obnoxious. So far, I'm with you. Firecrackers, yes. Fireworks, no. Go for it.
Okay, number 2. I'm a big dessert guy, much to my detriment at my age. I love desserts. I love all kinds of desserts. My most overrated dessert, though, apple pie. I've never been a big apple pie lover. I like apples. I like pie. I just don't like both of them together. Are you an apple pie guy?
So you're basically saying that you're anti-America is what you're saying.
I know,
right?
you're going to say that. See, you throw me under the bus right there. Yeah.
I mean, I love you, but even if you didn't like apple pie, it's un-American to admit it. It's one of those things that if you like it, enjoy it. And if you don't like it, shut up and pretend that you enjoy it. Because American as apple pie is a quote. I'm not with you on this one.
All right, Nick.
First one, okay. First one, okay. This one, not okay.
Okay.
1 for 1.
All right. But you know what? We're honest on this podcast. I got to keep it real here. My last one, maybe it's because I did local news in the 90s and I didn't see it a lot, but I've seen it since. I just don't get it. The Friends TV show. And I love comedy. I love to laugh. I have appreciation for a lot of different comedians and shows. I just don't get the Friends TV show. I like Chandler. Matthew Perry's character made me laugh every once in a while. But I love Jennifer Aniston. Don't get me wrong. But I don't know if I'd want to hang out with any of these people either.
I'm 50-50. I would say that it was certainly not one of the best comedies of all time. And I'll go with you. I'll go with you as it's overrated. I'm kind of with you. I will say that when me and my wife get mad at each other, we tend to do this to each other. And true Friends fans will understand what that means, as Ross and Monica tended to do that to each other. But I'm with you. I'm a Seinfeld guy. I'm an Office guy. Friends is okay. Overrated, yes. Not terrible, but overrated. I'm with you for sure.
I love The Office. Are you a Curb Your Enthusiasm guy too? If you're a Seinfeld guy,
you can't like one and not the other, right?
Exactly.
It's the same show.
Okay. Yeah. We had to finish strong after you calling me un-American for the apple pie. All right, let's make the transition. We have a big guest coming up. Our heart of the order, longtime play-by-play man for the Tampa Bay Lightning. I worked with him back in the day. Ladies and gentlemen, let's bring in this week's guest, Dave Mishkin. Mish, we go back a long ways. Thanks so much for taking the time. We're looking forward to this.
My pleasure, Mike. We met in what was our first season with the Lightning, my first of 2 decades, your first of 1, as you moved on to greener pastures. But back in 2002, we met. We've been friends ever since.
I was like an NBA player coming out of college. I was one and done with the Tampa Bay Lightning, unfortunately. And then, but we've maintained a great relationship. And I think the true testimony of friendship is we don't see each other often, but we had a great year together that first year. And, before I bring Nick in, because Nick's a hockey coach here at Florida Southern and loves hockey, a big fan of yours. Did you ever think you'd have this run with the Lightning, and not only this run, but this kind of success? I mean, it's been incredible for you.
I have never really thought about that. Look, I got my first job broadcasting for a team straight out of school, straight out of college. So I was incredibly lucky and recognized how fortunate I was to have that opportunity. And I was just happy to be able to broadcast games. I didn't care how many people were listening to me, actually, but it was what drew me to broadcasting in the first place while I was in college was the notion that you could get into the games for free. You get a really good seat and they feed you. I mean, what more could you ask for? And then you get to do this fun thing, call the game. That's how I got involved in it. And then I thought, boy, if I could do this professionally and actually get paid to do this, what else is there? And, that first job didn't pay me very much. But at the time, I was single. I was not married, no kids, and I could make it work. I was also living in a small market, Johnstown, Pennsylvania. The cost of living there was not particularly high. And I got to do what I love to do. And that's really been the calculus for me, Mike. Being able to do something I love has superseded any other consideration. When you get into it, you think, well, it would be great to get to the NHL, but in the meantime, I'm going to enjoy what I'm doing. And I tried to keep that philosophy. When you're a team broadcaster, and this, Mike, from from your years with the Saints. Like, you get a ticket to the train, but you don't know how far the train is going to go. Sometimes the train goes all the way to the end of the line, right? Sometimes the train never leaves the station, meaning you don't make the playoffs. You can't control that. You can't predict that almost. So you just get on that train, and where it takes you, it takes you. And I have been privileged in my time with the Lightning to have been on some trains that have gone all the way to the end, essentially, and have the opportunity again to call those championship moments, or at least moments where you're going deep in the playoffs and you're winning critical games. But I had no control over that. It just happened to be that I was in the right place at the right time. And there have been a few years where the team finished near the bottom of the league, or at the very bottom of the league. That's how they got Steven Stamkos, right? They finished dead last in the entire league. So there have been a few years like that as well. But for the most part, it's been a lot more winning than not winning. But even the not winning, getting a chance to call games is better than anything else I could have imagined myself doing.
Nick, I know you have a lot of questions. You have a great hockey background and have been listening to Mishkin for a lot of years.
Absolutely, yeah. It's interesting. You're part of two important parts of my life. One is on home games. Obviously, I've had season tickets now for 10 years. I'm a huge fan of the Lightning. Transplant from New England, former Bruins fan. Have figured out the brighter pastures of Tampa for sure. Being able to wear, board shorts and flip-flops to a hockey game is pretty awesome. But I fell in love with the team right away. And for the last 10 years, it's been routine. You go to the game, you enjoy the game, and then on the way home, you get on Twitter and you find out how Mishkin called the exciting goals. Literally type in, Mishkin call, and they'll come up. And so I got to enjoy goals, not only while I'm at the game, but then also on the ride home. And then obviously during away games, it's a staple. Me and my son, or me and my wife, we sit down and we listen to the games, and it's fantastic. You have brought obviously a lot of passion and joy to the Bolts, but I think more importantly, it's just it's an amazing organization. It's a great team to be a fan of, and it seems like everything to do with that team is fun, whether it's on the ice, in between periods, in the rink itself, or even on the radio. So thank you for what you've done. This is a pleasure.
Well, I appreciate it. Let me talk about the Lightning for a second. I'm not sure that it has always been that way. And a lot of the credit goes to Jeff Vinik, who bought the team in 2010. And he had a vision for how he wanted this organization to be run. And he's really not, from what I can tell, he's not overly hands-on. But what he is consistent in bringing people into leadership positions who share his philosophy, his vision, his way of doing business. And that's why, Nick, you are noticing everything from like the scoreboard features to the way the ushers are treating you to the respect you're given as a longtime season ticket member, even if you're a one-time fan, like coming to your first game. And I think the credit needs to go to the leadership at the top, and true leadership is actually leading, right? Infusing the rest of the organization with the vision that you have. So, Jeff Vinik bought the team in the spring of 2010. That next year, his first full year owning the team, the Lightning had a magical run to the Eastern Conference Final, got to Game 7, lost to your former team, the Bruins. And everyone thought, boy, this is going to be fantastic, because the team had missed the playoffs for 3 straight years prior to Jeff Vinik buying the team. But that was like fool's gold, right? It was not sustainable. The cupboard was fairly bare, organizationally speaking, in terms of the on-ice depth when he bought the team. And sure enough, like, it takes time to build up your organizational system and build up your young talent. It's hard to do it in hockey overnight. Whereas, let's say in the NBA, you might be able to bring in a star player who can literally change your fortunes drastically in a short period of time, because one basketball player can have such an outsized impact on the result of a game. Hockey's a little more difficult, as you know, because other than the goalie, nobody plays the whole game, right? And the goalie is only affecting one end of the ice. So it takes time to build up depth. So the next 2 years, the Lightning missed the playoffs. But what was happening while the team was figuring things out on the ice and building up its depth a lot of work was happening off the ice to build the quote unquote brand, which I didn't really understand what the brand meant when Todd Leiweke, who was the first CEO under Jeff Vinik, came in and explained, we're going to rehabilitate our brand. I'm like, what does that even mean? And they did it. So it's community outreach, it's the community hero program, it's building relationships in the community so that even if the team is not doing well on the ice, you're still having an impact on your community, which goes a really long way. And so the idea of the brand is like people have pride, you know, having this logo somewhere, whether it's a car flag or a scarf behind them on the wall, whatever the case, that's the brand. And I think the Lightning over the last decade plus, even while they were figuring things out early, how to win on the ice, the wheels were in motion for all of the stuff off the ice that was really, really important. And then, of course, the team did get good, right? So the younger talent was developed, and that's not an easy thing. I mean, it's drafting, but it's also developing. Yeah. And it's working in the right players into the right positions so that the team comes together. But it certainly has. So look, there's no substitute for winning. When the team is winning, it's a lot easier to be enthusiastic about the team. It's true. These things tend not to last forever. I mean, there is a cyclical element to this. And so certainly what the organization has done off the ice, I think, is like the groundwork has been laid there so that if the team reaches the point where they're not going deep in the playoffs every year, you know, you've planted enough seeds to grow the fan base, which a lot of the northern cities have already done. I mean, let's be honest, you know, the Boston Bruins are a very, very popular team, whether they are good or not. You know, their fan base isn't going to abandon them if they have a couple of bad years. They're going to be upset, but they're going to wait for brighter days. And I think the Lightning have reached that point now where they've built up kind of their core group of homegrown fans, but they like to keep winning.
And it's amazing. I'm so glad you said that. You know, in class, we've been talking about transformational leadership and how it can change an organization. And it's exactly what you just said. In fact, I'm going to show them what you just said. You know, the idea of building the brand, a total buy-in. It seems like everyone in the Lightning over the last decade has bought in. You know, the whole idea of, you know, giving $50,000 away every game to a community hero. The idea of the Lightning Foundation, the Vinik Sports Group, you know, Tampa Bay Lightning ball hockey. I mean, just the whole idea, you know, the Lightning High School Hockey League. It's just a complete hockey buy-in. And I think that they've taken the greatest things about up north and traditional northern hockey and the greatest things about Southern hospitality, and they've merged it into what I think is just the greatest hockey city on the planet. So it's fantastic.
Well, I'm not going to disagree with you. Certainly. I think the fan support here has been outstanding. And like, Mike, you probably remember, you know, our first year, you drive downtown. Downtown looked a lot different. Yeah. But you didn't see any like Bolts banners hanging on the side of buildings or billboards. Now you do.
Right.
Yeah. How did you get it? How did you get into the Lightning? I know how you talked really briefly about how you were lucky enough to kind of get into the point where you can talk out loud in front of people who were or maybe not listening to you. But now the idea of getting into the Lightning, how does that happen?
You mean getting to the NHL as a broadcaster?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah.
Well, I took probably it's the conventional route for a lot of NHL broadcasters, which is I went through the minors. And that first job in some ways is the hardest job because you're coming in cold. You have no contacts. Nobody's worked with you before. And I'll explain how that can help later. But that's why I was incredibly fortunate to get the first job. It was basically the equivalent of AA, 2 tiers below the NHL. And I mentioned Johnstown, Pennsylvania. That team no longer exists as a minor league team. The town has a junior team playing there now. But in the early 90s, you know, that was my first stop in the ECHL, which is known as the ECHL now. Back then it was known as the East Coast Hockey League, but their teams are not really on the East Coast anymore. And Johnstown's really not on the coast, but at least it was in the Eastern time zone. Now the ECHL has teams all over the country. But once you get a chance to work for a team, first of all, you're gaining a lot of valuable experience. Second of all, you're getting reps. I mean, the Chiefs, my first year, I want to say played 68 regular season games and then a handful of playoff games. I mean, I'd never gotten an opportunity to call 70 plus games before. In 1 year, I gained so much experience and got better at it. So now you multiply that by 3, because I had 3 years in Johnstown. And at the end of my 3rd year, there was a job opening in the American Hockey League in Hershey, Pennsylvania. And there had been other job openings that I had applied for in the AHL and the IHL, which was kind of a sister league to the AHL, International Hockey League at the time in the mid-90s. And I hadn't gotten a sniff from any of those teams. But Hershey had an affiliation agreement with Johnstown. So some of the players in Johnstown had been called up to Hershey. And so working in the front office, which I did in the minor leagues, the broadcaster did more than just broadcast. I was the PR director. I did sales. I did promotions. I'd gotten to know the management team in Hershey. So when their job opened, I was somebody that they knew. And so you're sending in a demo. So you have to appeal to the person hiring you in terms of your work, right? How you sound on the air. But there's so much more that goes into it, particularly when you're a team employee, because the last thing that anybody wants to do in a hiring position, and this is true for minor league general managers or directors of broadcasting or network executives or anybody in any field who is hiring someone, the last thing you want to do is have to hire somebody else a year later for the same job. You want this hire to be the hire. Now, if they move up, that's another matter, but you don't want to make a mistake. And if you like the demo, what other considerations do you have? Has to do with the to-be employee's work ethic, what kind of person they are. Do they show up on time? Are they a team player? How do they fit in? That's hard to know unless you've already worked for a team. And that's where being in the league can be a huge asset. So you're not only gaining experience in terms of your craft, but you're also serving kind of an example that will help you or hurt you down the road. Because what's the general manager in the hiring position going to do? That general manager is going to call the general manager who just employed you, right? And get a sense of what kind of employee you are. Are you going to fit in on the team? Minor league teams, the broadcaster has to ride the bus, has to be in the locker room or the clubhouse in baseball. Like, are you going to fit in? And that's a huge consideration. So that's where being in the sport can really be a feather in your cap or not, depending on the legacy you've kind of left behind. So I was fortunate. And then you have to have probably a connection, honestly. I mean, it doesn't always happen that way, but there's so many qualified people, because everybody else who's applying for a job in the American Hockey League that has come from another minor league has gotten the same level of experience that you've gotten. They've also called 70 plus games a year. They're also really, really good on the air. It comes down maybe an element of personal preference, but that's why knowing someone, it's not the old boy network. I don't think it's shady, but I think it's understandable. It's the way the world works. If you're in a hiring position, you want to know best you can what you're getting when you hire an employee beyond a half-hour face-to-face interview. And in the case of a broadcaster, listening to a demo tape or watching a demo tape. So I got the job with Hershey in 1994, and I was there for 8 years. So I spent 11 years in the minors. And there were a fair number of NHL jobs that opened up during the time I was in Hershey that I did not get. And again, it kind of came down to being in the right place at the right time and having the right person be in a position of authority. And that right person for me was Jay Feaster, who was the general manager at the Lightning in 2002 when the job opened up, because my predecessor, John Allers, got the television job with Anaheim. So he was able to move from radio to television and took that promotion essentially, which opened up the radio job. And Jay Feaster happened to be the guy who hired me in Hershey. He had been the general manager in Hershey. So it's probably not an uncommon story of how these things come about. But if he didn't believe that I could do the job, he wouldn't have strongly endorsed me for the position. ultimately was our director of broadcasting at the time, Jason Dixon, a guy you remember well, Mike, who ultimately hired me. But they had to have belief that I could do the job. But it's hard to have that belief if you haven't put in the time kind of building up your own reputation, both on the air and off the air. That's a really long-winded answer, Nick, to your question of how I ended up with the Lightning. But that was, over 20 years ago, and I've been really blessed to have been able to work for this team ever since.
Mish, I love your appreciation after all these years for what you do. But when people think of Dave Mishkin, they think of passion. Your score calls really legendary among Lightning fans, known all over the country. You're Yale educated, a very cerebral guy. You're very modest too, so I'm going to make you uncomfortable by bragging about you. But it's really almost a different part of your personality when somebody scores and you get that excited. Was this something that you had from the beginning of calling games, or has it kind of developed over the years, your score calls?
I've always had it. It's probably changed a little bit. Like, I think your voice matures. I mean, I don't sound the same as I did when I was 19 and 20. Yeah. I just don't. But the level of enthusiasm has always been there. And look, when I'm calling a game, I am in the game. That's the only way I know how to call a game. Now, I shouldn't say that. If I were calling a national game, I would still be in the game, but I would be cognizant that I would have to call it differently than if I'm calling it as a team employee to the fans of that team, even though the other fans can also hear. I mean, we're not dealing with like regional broadcasts now where nobody outside a radius of 30 miles can actually listen to you, right? Like previous generations, that was the case. You literally were broadcasting only to the team's fans that were near your team. Now anybody can hear me or hear you, but you're still broadcasting primarily as the team announcer, in my opinion, to the fans of that team. You are representing the team that employs you to the fans of that team. That's different than calling the Super Bowl, for example, where the announcers do need to call it down the middle way more, but you can still be passionate. You can still be into the game. But I have always been immersed in the broadcast. And so when something big happens, something exciting happens, I am not shy about showing that emotion. Same way I'd feel as if I were watching a team that I was passionate about on my living room sofa. So I've had that philosophy from the get-go. I basically went into this calling all sports, but especially hockey, which is not the easiest sport to describe, I think, because the puck moves so quickly when you don't have a picture. So the two decisions I made almost from the very first time I put on a headset, I was going to be enthusiastic when it called for it. If something exciting happened in the game, I was going to be excited on the air. And the other was that probably on the sliding scale of being as descriptive as possible on one end of the spectrum, and maybe being what I call a little bit more narrative on the other side of the spectrum, which is that you're not on every play. Maybe get into more of a conversational play-by-play. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's personal choice, but I definitely am way more on the descriptive side of the ledger. And so I try as much as I can to stay on the puck and describe, even if it's like a D to D pass, I'll describe that. That's my choice, but that was something I decided very early on. So those are kind of my two tenets, I guess, as a play-by-play broadcaster. I want to be as descriptive as possible, and I'm not going to be shy about getting emotional if the situation calls for it.
Because you're so involved in it, do you have a tough time leaving the game at the office? In other words, on a big win or a big loss, do you go home and feel like you were part of the team? I mean, it's amazing because we've talked to players before, and they always say every NHL player knows that they're going to lose some games and they're going to lose some heartbreakers, whether it's in the playoffs or regular season, and you have to have a short memory and be able to kind of bounce back. Even as a fan, I have a tough time being in a good mood after a tough loss on the drive home. I have to imagine that would be even more difficult for you after calling something and being in the game so much, being so passionate and excitable. When that happens, how can you go back to normal life after a big win or a big loss?
You can. So look, I think I'm happier when the team wins, and I'm less happy when the team doesn't win. And some losses, like you said, Nick, are more frustrating than others, and playoff losses hurt. There's no doubt. Playoff elimination hurts.
Yeah.
But I can absorb it fairly quickly. Playoff wins and losses probably stay with me anyway through the rest of the night. And then usually I've processed it by the next day because there's more work to be done. I mean, I do more than just broadcast. I write. Mm-hmm. I have a show on our 24/7 station with Greg Linnelli, who does our intermission and pregame, postgame on our broadcasts. So I have other things that are happening where, like, I kind of have to move on and think about what's next, right? I write my postgame often right after the game. Wow. And so I kind of have to get into an analytical mode, which is I write a post-game column, I guess you'd call it, essentially how I saw it from the booth. So I kind of have to put my thinking cap on and think about how to write that. Sometimes I do it the next morning if the game is late. So to answer your question, I feel emotion, but maybe more so than fans in a way. I'm able to process it fairly quickly, and move on to what's next.
Mish, I want to ask you, so I was thinking about it. You have 3 Stanley Cup championship rings, which equates to 3 Stanley Cup calls. It's rare to be able to call every goal of a career like a Steven Stamkos. I mean, Victor Hedman's career has been unbelievable. Do you have I'm going to take it away from the Stanley Cup because I think that's an easy answer, but do you have a favorite moment besides the Stanley Cup wins, a certain game, a certain call that stands out beyond that?
So you're on the train, you don't know how far it's going to go, and the train could stop at any time. And that's the beauty of sports, right? Like, you never know what is going to happen. We can try to predict, the Vegas bookies certainly have made it an art of figuring out kind of who should win and tailor it in a way that they can make money on that. But ultimately we don't know. And that's the beauty of sports. Nothing is scripted. And so you have to be flexible to be in the moment. And that's why when something good happens, you get this rush of energy. And when something bad happens, you feel so deflated because you don't know that it's going to happen necessarily. So you have to process that, which is kind of like what Nick was asking in the last question. So the great moments I remember, but I would probably answer it more from the broadcasting challenge. And there is a play I remember because it was a difficult call, but it was a signature moment. And I thought I did about as well as I could do. And that was in the bubble. And the Lightning were playing the bubble in 2020. They're playing the Islanders in the conference final. And it was in overtime. And Anthony Cirelli scored to win the game and win the series for the Lightning. And while there were some broadcasters that went to the bubble in Toronto and the bubble in Edmonton, most didn't, including me. So Phil Esposito and I called every playoff game in 2020, basically from Amalie Arena off a monitor, which that can be done. I mean, it's not like we reinvented the wheel. There have been broadcasts done off monitors before. And we had a nice setup. Like, we had 2 huge monitors. We had producers with us with access to get to the press box in Toronto and Edmonton in case there was a question about something that was missed. But ultimately, you are beholden to what the camera is showing you. And so if the camera decides to show something else, and you might miss something, like if the camera leaves the puck, like if the camera is showing John Cooper on the bench and the puck is dropped, you're not going to know what's happening until the camera goes back to game action. So that particular call was really tough because Cirelli shoots the puck and nobody knows if it's in. Cirelli doesn't know if it's in. The goaltender, Varlamov, doesn't know if it's in. The referee doesn't know if it's in. I don't know if it's in. It could be in, might not be in. And then there's this realization that it's in. And it's like game over, series over. Lightning are going to the Stanley Cup final. And I thought I navigated that about as well as I could off a monitor, right? So that's how I would answer the question. But there are probably, so many signature moments. The Stamkos goal in Dallas, not in Dallas, against Dallas in the bubble, It's one of the greatest moments in Lightning history. And that one I remember too. And again, that's off the monitor. So you got to make sure that, your call to the best of your ability meets the moment. And I felt that Phil and I were able to do that and kind of capture the wonder of this moment, like how unbelievable it was that this thing happened, where he had been out the whole playoffs, comes in, ends up only playing 3 shifts, but scores. It was a big goal too.
Yeah.
So those are
I get chills just thinking about it. I mean, that's not only my favorite Stamkos goal, not only my favorite Lightning goal, but my favorite goal of all time. And I mean, I've been at some great goals. I think your call of when Tyler Johnson beat the Canadians on that second pass in the playoffs in 2015, I think it was fantastic. Yeah. But I'm agreeing with you. The moment of Stamkos scoring that goal, it wasn't a game winner. It was in the beginning of the game, but it was magical. I think you said it right. Magical is the right word.
Yeah, and it was a big goal too. Like, that shouldn't take away from the moment, but like Stammer said, a lot of his signature goals have come in wins, which makes it happier in terms of celebrating the moment. But yeah, that was a 1-1 series. That was game 3, and the Lightning blew out the Stars, it turned out, in game 3. And the rest of the series was very close. The next 2 games went to overtime. The winning game for the clincher was 2-0. I mean, the Lightning really dominated that game, but it's not like it was a blowout. It was a 1-goal game and then a 2-goal game. But that game 3, I thought, gave the Lightning a leg up in the series, and Stamkos' goal was a part of that because that got them rolling.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Mish, I appreciate so many things about you, but I think the quality that stands out is how authentic you are. Not only with your score calls, I know those are not manufactured. I know fans all the time ask you, give me a score call, and they gotta wait for the game. They
like you did. You asked me before we started this.
No, I tried.
I said no.
It's like a good reporter, a good attorney. You got to know the answer to the question.
But it wouldn't sound. That's the thing. It wouldn't sound as good.
Right.
Exactly.
Whereas, to me, I can't even use the word good. It wouldn't be as authentic. It wouldn't.
How many times do you get asked that though in a year?
In a year, I don't know, 5 to 10, maybe. I get it less now. I think more that people do it to me.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. All right. Yeah,
that's okay.
It's actually kind of funny, I think. Yeah.
No. Well, listen, I really appreciate your time. It's a busy season. It's a grueling season. I know you're used to it after all these years, but for people who don't know Dave Mishkin, you got to know him a little better in this podcast. I've known him for many years, and you're the real deal on so many levels. A great family man, a great coworker, a great friend to me for many, many years. I wish you continued success, not only this season, but in many years to come. I know Nick, and I really appreciate your time a great deal.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me on. Enjoyed it.
Oh, we appreciate the great Dave Mishkin. Very modest Mishkin throughout all the years, but boy, if you're a Lightning fan, he is a legend and a treasured announcer. Hope he continues to call games for many, many years. All right, let's move from Mishkin to our final 5. Last week we had a theme. We always try to have a theme for the final 5. We're getting closer to the Super Bowl, Nick. We'll analyze the Super Bowl next week, but let's talk about when you watch these games. Championship Sunday, we just got past that. We are listening to great NFL announcers, but we're going to pick the best ones and really the hot topics when it comes to NFL announcing. The first one, your best play-by-play announcer, you have Al Michaels, you have Joe Buck, you have Jim Nantz, you have Mike Tirico. That's a pretty good foursome right there, but you have to pick one. Who's your favorite?
I actually do like all 4. I have nothing bad to say about any of them, but for me, it's Al Michaels. And it's not because of football, actually. It's because of his call for Miracle on Ice. Growing up in the Northeast, based in hockey, and that was a very important moment of my life. It happened right around when I was born, and I followed him through his career, and obviously watching the NFL many, many times here. I look forward to him talking. I like when he talks, and I think he does a great job in many sports, but specifically football. So Al Michaels all the way for me.
I agree with you, too. I think all 4 very talented, but Al Michaels steps it up a notch. Not only the longevity, but the energy. When you hear his voice, you just feel like it's a big game, a big moment. I know he was criticized recently for having a lack of energy when Jacksonville came back to beat the Chargers. I think part of that was working with Tony Dungy. They hadn't worked together a lot. I think Dungy, frankly, is a better studio analyst than a color analyst. calling games. He hasn't had a lot of experience. Al Michaels, to me, is the gold standard. In baseball, I love Vin Scully, but boy, it's going to be tough for any of the three, even if they continue their careers, which it looks like they will, to ever top Al Michaels. His versatility, just the way he calls games, he's so smooth. He's one of those guys, Nick, even when he messes up, it still sounds pretty good. So I'm a big Al Michaels fan. All right, number 2 in our final 5. Best analyst. I'm going to look at the top 2 because I'm going to get to Tony Romo in just a second. I'm going to take him off the board. You have Chris Collinsworth and you have Troy Aikman. Of those two, who do you like the most?
I like Collinsworth. Collinsworth makes sense to me. He never says anything wildly outrageous. He's not wildly emotional, but he's always on point. He's calm. I like calm announcers, unless it's hockey. Then, of course, Mishkin takes the puck for me, of course. But when it comes to football, I like calm announcers who can explain what's happening very, very appropriately. Collinsworth all day long.
I'll take Collinsworth. There's nothing wrong with Troy Aikman. Troy Aikman's, like, to me, a solid base hit, but Collinsworth takes it up a notch because Chris Collinsworth is not afraid to criticize. Not only is he opinionated, but he also researches paramount with him. He started Pro Football Focus, which has become the gold standard in terms of really rating players and analyzing players' play. And here's another thing about Chris Collinsworth. He retired in 1988. There have been a lot of announcers who have come on the scene since 1988. You have to be really good to still be relevant in 2023, retiring in 1988. And on a side note, Chris Collinsworth and I don't know if you know this, Nick Nugent, we went to the same high school, Titusville, Florida. We went to Titusville Astronaut. And growing up in Titusville, we didn't have a lot of people that made it to the big time. Chris Collinsworth made the Super Bowl for the Bengals and was on the cover of Sports Illustrated my freshman year in high school. We all love the Bengals because of Chris Collinsworth. But the main thing is not afraid to offer an opinion and, frankly, does his research too. The double whammy there for Collinsworth. All right, we left Tony Romo out. And our number 3 in our final 5, Tony Romo getting a lot of criticism as of late. People loved Tony Romo at first. He was Romo Donstrous. He predicted everything. But lately, he's kind of scaled that back a little bit. Is his star on the rise, or is he really fading, or somewhere in between? What do you think of Tony Romo right now?
I think it's paused. I think it's not fading or on the rise. I think it's paused. I think he's trying to figure himself out. Certainly, I loved him when he came out. The whole idea of to be able to predict the plays with the accuracy that he was able to. He's a former successful quarterback. He's able to talk in a relatively eloquent way. But most importantly, I think right now he's trying to figure out where he lives in this whole announcing game. And I think he's trying to focus on other things a little bit. And I think certainly it can still be on the rise in terms of a star, but you can't get rid of the idea of predicting plays. That's what made him special in the first place. It wasn't because he was a former Cowboys quarterback. It's because he came on quickly. People liked to listen to him, but also most importantly, he was predicting plays with outrageous accuracy as they were happening, which doesn't happen in announcing. Announcing is more reactive, and he was proactive. That was a lot of fun. It was a huge change in the announcing world. So I think he's paused. I think if he can figure himself out a little bit, I look forward to many more years of Tony Romo.
I think you can look at this issue in 2 ways, and I'm not really sure how much of this is true, but I think if you're an executive and you have a guy who is hot, Tony Romo's making $17 million a year as a broadcaster. He raised the bar for everybody, whether it's Troy Aikman and a lot of these color analysts, and you wonder, are the executives getting into his head and saying, we love you predicting plays, but we need you to be more this guy, and that's a big mistake. You hired that guy and you're paying him well, and you like him for a reason. Let him go with what kind of brought him there. But I also kind of wonder this. Tony Romo was great at predicting right after he retired. You wonder if the research has slipped a little bit because he's not knowing this personnel because he didn't just play against them a few years back. Maybe he's not doing the research now, and maybe he doesn't have that familiarity factor right when he first retired to predict all the things that he did right afterwards. So you wonder if that's part of the equation. But TV executives, if you're trying to mess with Tony Romo and make him somebody he's not, please stop doing that. So I'm with you. I'm in the middle. Tony Romo, maybe you have to do more research moving forward. Maybe that's the case. Okay.
Yep.
As we tape this, Tom Brady has just retired. It looks like Tom Brady will be the main guy at Fox next season. But for right now, it's Greg Olsen, who, unlike Tony Romo, is getting rave reviews for his research, for his smoothness on the air, for his analysis. Long term, you like Tom Brady? you like Greg Olsen, Nick Nugent.
I'm probably going to get disinvited to Thanksgiving with my family up north, but I'm going Greg Olsen. I know that's a surprise. I think on the field, obviously Tom Brady takes the cake, but he's not that fantastic of a speaker. He's not. I'm having a hard time imagining how he's going to do on play-by-play. Certainly, as an in-studio analyst, that could probably work out pretty well. But Greg Olsen is smooth. He's researched. He knows exactly what he's talking about when he's saying it. There's no doubt. In fact, if you listen to Greg Olsen, you don't even think he was a former player. You think it's just a guy that knows exactly what he needs to do, and he's been doing it his whole life. I'm an Olsen fan. I'm a Brady fan, of course, but I think you stick with Greg Olsen.
Olsen may be the modern-day Chris Collinsworth. I mean, he was a good player, not a great player. At times he was great, but not consistently great, obviously like Tom Brady. I'll give you the Drew Brees example. I covered Drew Brees for many years, as we've talked about in this podcast. I remember the one time Brees kind of took exception with one of my questions is, I knew he was going into broadcasting, and I asked him, is it going to be hard for you to criticize players being recently retired, having played with them, having played against them? And he looked at me and he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, you're going to have to criticize them." And he said, "Well, I don't look at it that way. I just want to analyze football and not criticize players." You can't do that. That's why Chris Collinsworth has lasted so long. Olsen's not at the level of criticism that Chris Collinsworth is, but he's getting there. I think Tom Brady will be more comfortable criticizing players, but I agree with you. We saw more of a personality with Tom Brady when he came to Tampa Bay because he was confined with Belichick up there and the way the culture is. I want to give Brady a chance, but if I'm having to predict right now, I think Greg Olsen is the modern-day Collinsworth. I think he has a bright future. He's one of those guys that kind of came out of nowhere but has excelled in every opportunity. So I'm going to go Greg Olsen, but I'll say this. I'm very interested to hear what Tom Brady's going to have to say. On social media, my friend, they're going to have a field day because Tom Brady, you have an opinion on him either way. A lot of haters of Tom Brady for the simple fact is he's won too much in his career. So whatever he does, Twitter's going to have a field day. All right, our last one in our final five. We both love Al Michaels, but I'm maybe showing my age here a little bit. Your ideal team in terms of calling football games: Pat Summerall, John Madden. Of course, you have, how about going old school, Dick Enberg and Merlin Olsen, and really old school, the old Monday Night Crew. This is the kind of before me, even way before you, Howard Cosell, Frank Gifford, Dandy Don. If you had to pick, let's say one of those three to call the Super Bowl, who would you pick? You have a favorite of those three?
Well, first of all, I mean, these people are. This is so long ago. I tried to look it up on Wikipedia. Wikipedia didn't have it, so I had to go to the local library. I had to break out the microfiche and try to look up who these people were. It's extraordinarily
microfiche reference. I like that.
I mean, good Lord, horrifying. I'm gonna stick with Madden. First of all, I'll do two. I'm a Madden guy, obviously. Grew up in the area of Madden and his wonderful sayings and his advice on life and his statements on certainty. But also, I know that my father liked Frank Gifford. So for just sentimental reasons, I'm going Madden and Gifford. The other two, I'm going to have to continue to look up and get some research on because Wikipedia didn't have it.
All right, speaking of Wikipedia and microfiche, do you remember Merlin Olsen on Little House on the Prairie, my friend? How about that back in the day? Do you even remember that?
No, okay. I don't remember that.
I'm aging myself again.
You know what? Because I wasn't in the Korea War either. I mean, good Lord, this is wild.
Do you like Frank Caliendo?
Yes, I guess.
I love Frank Caliendo.
He would be on the overrated list for me.
Oh my gosh, well, that's a topic for another day. I love Frank Caliendo doing John Madden. John Madden couldn't stand it until his grandkids loved Caliendo. Then he kind of got it. I love John Madden. So much appreciation to him because of the three tiers of John Madden: the Hall of Fame coach, the Hall of Fame announcers, and then our kids who only know him as the video game guy, the all Madden, and all that stuff. But it just shows you his longevity and how impressive it is. Yeah, big John Madden guy. Changed television and opened up the acceptance of having more of a personality and being creative and having fun. And, he was kind of a serious coach, but he broadened his horizons and he was smart to do it when he became a TV analyst. Okay, that's our final five. We'll have more next week. But for now, our final rent. And you know what? I'm going to stay with NFL coverage because, there's a lot of personalities that I like, but frankly, there's something that has to change. And you know what? I know the NFL gives all this money to these networks. It's why the players make all the money, Nick. But please, we need to do some downsizing. When I watch the pregame shows, when I watch the halftime shows, boy, there's a lot of guys on the set. You know, they just added Gronk, replaced him. They have Sean Payton at Fox, but you have Terry Bradshaw, you have Howie Long, you have Michael Strahan, you have Jimmy Johnson. Too much of a good thing. I mean, I almost want to do a research study on how much these guys get paid per word. I was watching halftime of the NFC Championship game between the 49ers and the Philadelphia Eagles, and they talked so much. Gronk didn't say one word in a segment. They brought him back. You only heard from Gronk in one segment. Less is more. Too many people on these sets. I could break down every set, really. NBC, CBS, Fox. I mean, I know you have a lot of money to spend on broadcasters, but there's too much. I almost want to hear more from some of these guys, but I can't because there's so many voices up there. I don't know how you feel about that, but I just feel like too much of a good thing in terms of these pre- and halftime shows.
I agree. I totally agree. I think a lot of them are former athletes that miss being in the sunshine a little bit and want their place again. I agree. I think that it's too much. Big fan of that. My final rant's a little bit different. With some of the games this past weekend, you hear, you know, I'm a Twitter guy, and Twitter is just taking over when it comes to advice and opinions on how the game should have gone. And certainly the hashtag NFL is rigged was getting very popular this weekend. My rant is very simple. I'm tired of people saying things are rigged. It's not rigged. If it was rigged, then you'd have the Cowboys against the 49ers every single time. If it was rigged, you'd have the Lakers always in the finals. If it was rigged, you'd always have the Yankees in the World Series. It's not rigged. I go back to my rant from last week. It's probably because the officials are terrible. All right. They're making mistakes. It's not rigged. It's not, the world's not against you. Just because you lost a stupid bet that you made online doesn't mean that the entire NFL system is rigging against what you want. In fact, if you think it's rigged, start cheering for the other team. Start cheering for the teams that you know that they want. But people like to say it's rigged only when their team loses. I hate it. Even some of the coaches are getting in on it now. The players are getting in on it, and they're saying the word's rigged. It's nonsense. It's a stupid hashtag. It's a stupid belief. Absolutely crazy.
Well, we're not rigged. Our opinions are real. And you know what? I'll go back to the beginning. You said I'm un-American for saying I don't like apple pie. That is the essence of being American. I can voice my opinion, Nick Nugent, and I can be proud of it. I don't like apple pie. Our forefathers would be proud of me for saying that.
Yeah, well, I teach his own, but that's a horrible statement to make. And I feel bad for you, and I feel bad for your family who has to live with an un-American guy like that. Terrible.
I'm proud of my wallet too. Well, listen, week number 2, we're improving week after week. If you want to subscribe, we're on YouTube, Neighbors, and Nugent. We're on all the platforms for podcasts very soon as well. Please spread the word. We're going to have more great guests like Dave Mishkin. Great perspective in terms of sport management, academics, sports, our opinions, how it helps young people, how older demographics can enjoy sports as well. We cover the gamut here on Neighbors and Nugent. For my partner, Nick Nugent, our great guest, Dave Mishkin, and our esteemed producer, Justin Thomas, we will see you next time.